In the rolling plains of the Dakota Territory, a quiet tension simmered for decades, culminating in a brief but fierce conflict in the spring of 1891. 2 years after being granted statehood, North Dakota and South Dakota found themselves embroiled in a bizarre and bloody skirmish over the exact location of their shared boundary. The tale of this obscure war is one of stubborn pride, political machinations, and the chaos that ensues when lines on a map become matters of life and death. Following their admission to the Union in 1889, both North and South Dakota faced the daunting task of establishing their state governments and infrastructure. However, the precise delineation of the boundary between the two states remained a contentious issue. The boundary was supposed to follow the 7th standard parallel, but discrepancies in the original surveys, coupled with the rugged and often featureless terrain, led to disputes over where the line actually lay. Governor Eli Sutherland of North Dakota and Governor Thomas Rigby of South Dakota, both staunch defenders of their state's rights and territories, found themselves at odds. Tensions escalated as settlers and landowners along the disputed boundary line were caught in a bureaucratic tug-of-war, unsure of which state's laws and taxes applied to them. The spark that ignited the conflict came in late March 1891, when a North Dakota survey team attempted to erect boundary markers on what they claimed was the 7th standard parallel. South Dakota officials, convinced the markers encroached into their territory, sent a group of state militia to dismantle them. The two groups clashed, resulting in a heated exchange of gunfire that left several men wounded. News of the skirmish spread quickly, stoking the fires of regional pride and anger. In both Bismarck and Pierre, the state capitals, legislators and citizens demanded action. Calls for mobilization rang out, and within days, both states had assembled makeshift militias, composed mainly of enthusiastic volunteers rather than trained soldiers. On April 1, 1891, the North Dakota militia, led by Colonel Henry McAllister, marched southward to secure what they believed to be their rightful boundary. Meanwhile, the South Dakota militia, under the command of Captain William Hayes, moved north to intercept them. The two forces met near the small settlement of Elk Creek, a place now lost to history but once the site of a significant confrontation. The initial engagement was chaotic. Both sides, ill-prepared and poorly equipped, exchanged volleys of gunfire from behind makeshift barricades of rocks and fallen trees. Civilians from nearby farms and towns watched in disbelief as their state's militias fought over an invisible line. Casualties were surprisingly low considering the intensity of the firefight, but the psychological impact was profound. The Dakotas were at war with each other. As dawn broke on the second day, the conflict showed no signs of abating. Reinforcements arrived from both states, swelling the ranks of the militias. The landscape around Elk Creek was transformed into a battlefield, with trenches dug and strategic positions fortified. The fighting grew more intense as both sides attempted to gain the upper hand. At one point, the South Dakota militia managed to outflank their opponents, capturing several North Dakota soldiers and briefly pushing the battle line northward. However, North Dakota's forces, spurred on by their belief in the righteousness of their cause, launched a fierce counterattack, reclaiming lost ground. In the midst of the chaos, a group of settlers from the disputed territory formed a delegation to plead for peace. They met with Governor Sutherland and Governor Rigby, urging them to negotiate and end the bloodshed. Both governors, however, were entrenched in their positions, unwilling to back down in the face of what they saw as an existential threat to their state's sovereignty. By the third day, the conflict had attracted national attention. Newspapers across the country reported on the bizarre and alarming situation in the Dakotas, and pressure mounted for the federal government to intervene. President Benjamin Harrison, recognizing the absurdity and danger of two states warring over a boundary dispute, dispatched federal mediators to broker a ceasefire. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, both sides were reaching the limits of their endurance. Supplies were running low, and morale was waning. In a desperate bid to end the stalemate, Colonel McAllister of North Dakota devised a daring plan to outmaneuver the South Dakota forces. Under the cover of darkness, he led a contingent of his men on a flanking march, aiming to encircle and force the surrender of the enemy. The maneuver almost succeeded. By the early hours of the fourth day, McAllister's men had managed to position themselves behind the South Dakota militia. However, the surprise was spoiled when a sentry raised the alarm, leading to a brutal and confused melee in the pre-dawn light. The fighting was fierce, with both sides sustaining heavy casualties. The chaos of the battle was compounded by the arrival of the federal mediators, who found themselves caught in the crossfire as they attempted to negotiate a ceasefire. The arrival of the federal mediators, combined with the mounting casualties and the exhaustion of both militias, finally brought the conflict to a halt. Realizing the futility of further bloodshed, Governor Sutherland and Governor Rigby agreed to a temporary ceasefire and negotiations to resolve the boundary dispute. The mediators quickly organized a conference between the two governors and their top officials. Over the course of several tense days, they hammered out a compromise. It was agreed that a new, impartial survey would be conducted to determine the precise location of the seventh standard parallel. Until then, both states would refrain from any further actions that could escalate tensions. The new survey, conducted by a team of federal surveyors, finally settled the boundary dispute. The line they established was accepted by both North Dakota and South Dakota, bringing an end to the conflict. The Battle of Elk Creek, while brief, left a lasting impact on the region. The residents of the disputed territory, who had borne the brunt of the chaos, began to rebuild their lives, grateful for the return of peace. In the years that followed, the events of the Dakota Border War became the stuff of local legend, a curious chapter in the history of the American West. The militias disbanded, and the governors, once bitter rivals, eventually found common ground in their shared commitment to the prosperity of their states. The Dakota Border War of 1891, though short-lived and relatively small in scale, serves as a reminder of the intense regional pride and the lengths to which people will go to defend their perceived rights and territories. It also highlights the importance of clear and accurate boundaries and the potential for conflict when such boundaries are disputed. Today, the story of the war is commemorated in both North and South Dakota, with historical markers and annual reenactments celebrating the resolution of a conflict that could have torn the region apart. It stands as a testament to the resilience and determination of the people of the Dakotas, and a cautionary tale about the dangers of letting pride and stubbornness drive us to war. The plains of North and South Dakota are now peaceful, their rolling landscapes a far cry from the battlefield of Elk Creek. But the memory of the Dakota Border War endures, a poignant chapter in the history of the American frontier.